everyone.
Can everybody hear me well? My name is David Tran. I am not related to anybody else in this room. I'm a master's student here in creative writing. That means I'm a disappointment. This is a piece called Graveyard. It's something I wrote about my father. Being a first-generation Vietnamese person, I think all of us grapple with the Vietnamese that is inside of us. Meaning, there's one version of us here, in school, at work. There's a version of us at home. There's the version of us that's actually in Vietnam. And my piece, I'm hoping, is how we grapple with those versions of ourselves. It's not as serious as I made it out to sound. Just chill. Right? It's a good time. Right? Graveyard. There are no American boys here in fatigues, dousing their shaven heads with canteen water. There'll be no chopper that reeks of old blood and fresh vomit. No one will apply pressure to cork the bullet holes. The Delta is empty. There are no new soldiers scuttling for cover as they bury themselves into the muck like blue crabs. There is no gunfire or tripwire to look out for. No one here knows a Charlie. It's not 1960. President Richard Nixon has long since been dead, but even today, the name Tricky Dicky is still sexy to say. Make no mistake, this is Vietnam. It's been decades since a Jimi Hendrix guitar solo has been heard in this jungle. My father, the skinny guide, and I wade through the tall elephant grass looking for a cemetery. We're breathing in steam. I wear shorts and sandals, while my father and the guide are bundled in jeans and tennis shoes. Sweat pours down my face, my back, and the sides of my ribs. Even the soles of my feet are sweating. I am a broken fire hydrant. I swat at the mosquitoes feeding on the blood dripping from the cuts on my calves. Elephant grass can grow 7 feet high and can cut. A detail my father forgot to share. The guide mumbles something in Vietnamese as he hacks away at the vines and grass with a machete. What'd he say? The grass is used as a deterrent, my father says in English. How much farther to the graveyard? An Noi yet? The guide asks in Vietnamese. Nothing, my father says. My father said the reason grandfather was buried in a remote location was because he was important. A revolutionary soldier against Ho Chi Minh. I pictured him as William Wallace, but smaller. Fighting the English with blue face paint, a kilt, and swinging a broadsword. Grandfather must have smelled like grass and dirt. The irony was that he looked like Ho Chi Minh, mostly because he was one of the few men that could ever grow a full beard. You guys know what I'm talking about. Once, when one of my high school history classes actually made it as far as the Vietnam War in the textbook, I opened to a page with a picture of an old bearded man. I asked my father, was Ho Chi Minh your father? He shook his head and told me I was silly. Even my father's friends, while drunk, asked him in whispers, Anton, is Ho Chi Minh your father? I'm your friend. You can tell me. What was he like? I asked. I don't know. He and I fought a lot, he says, walking faster into the jungle. What do you mean you don't know? He was your father. I left when I was very young. I fall into the grass, face first. Be careful. There are snakes, my father says. marching away even faster and growing even more distant. Snakes. I hate snakes, lizards, cockroaches, and brightly colored spiders that all seem to be living in my grandmother's outhouse. I only use the shed before nightfall. I made a rule not to drink anything after sunset. People say I look like my father in the face. When people tell that to my mother, she says, I'm glad. Maybe people will finally stop being so suspicious about me and the mailman. I inherited my mother's sense of humor, but unfortunately, I'm easily startled like my father. My mother says it's because we eat too many chicken hearts. At times, I also show flashes of his anger. I remember my father getting so angry that he took a butcher's knife and plunged the blade deep into the wood. I don't remember what it was over or how old I was. I remember him leaving and not coming back for an entire day. My mother didn't tell jokes or cry. She held me as we watched The Thornbirds, a film about a priest who falls in love in the outback. We watched until my father came back. That night, he put a coat over my pajamas and took me. He drove us to the theater to see The Empire Strikes Back, past my bedtime as a way to say, I'm sorry. When I look back on that night, and on Darth Vader, in his asthmatic voice, reaching for Luke with his cold metal hand, and then revealing that, yes, indeed, he was Skywalker's father, I realized that to some degree, all fathers fuck up. I know grandfather was important, but why is he buried so far away? So people wouldn't desecrate his body. Desecrate. I think of vampires and werewolves in church ruins. Had my grandfather done something in life that was so heinous that people were willing to consider digging up his body, what would they do? Stake his heart? Salt and burn his corpse? Urinate on him? What would they do to him in death that they couldn't do in life? Personally, I had never gotten a person that angry. At least the ones I've heard have done me the favor of forgiving me or simply forgetting who I was. In the Dunrun, the guide says that we're here. The graveyard is enclosed in a tall metal fence with barbed wire. The vines crawl out from the fence. With a key, the gate scratches open. The graveyard is an abandoned kingdom. Debris covers the headstones that look like broken bricks, stolen from a castle. I look for the name Tran. Some of these graves are older than the United States. Some have just a name with no dates, no birth, no death. One simply reads, Beloved. Over here, my father calls out and waving me over. The guide lets himself out. This isn't it. The head zone says Yul, I say. That was our last name before grandfather changed it to Tran, my father says. He's sitting on top of another grave and touching his father's headstone as if it were young, soft, and could still feel. My father's nose is running as he looks at the broken stones. He says, after the war was over, we had to change our names. We're looking for your grandfather. I don't know what he did, but I was told it was important. He moved us away from all our friends to a small remote village and built a house and changed the name to Tran. It was impossible to find us. Everyone in the village kept our family a secret. Our guide is the son of a woman that your grandfather helped. Why haven't I heard any of this before? We don't talk about the past much, your mother and I. Life was different then, because we only thought about getting through the day, and then on what needed to be done for tomorrow. We had outlived yesterday. That was enough. What need was there in dwelling on the past? Telling stories alone can't help. What was was he like? He and I fought a lot. He wanted me to be more responsible, and I just wasn't. I was rarely home. I lied about my age and left the village to join the military. When the war was over, I fled Vietnam with the other soldiers for America. That's where I met your mother. I never wrote to my parents. Why? I asked. I'm standing over his shoulder. He reaches for my hand and squeezes until my fingertips grow red. Because the communists would find them. Because I wasn't a good son. Your mother sent a letter home to her family and attached a picture of us, and it included the name of my family's village. They traveled to find my parents. That was the first time anyone had heard of me since going into the service. Before that, my parents thought I was dead. They made an altar to me. 2 months later, I received a letter from my mother saying that my father had died. Is this the first time you've come back to see the grave? Yes. The last time I was here, people didn't believe me. This time I brought an old picture of myself with my father. We look like each other in the face. I rub my father's head. His hair is warm, brittle, and coarse. But even in this heat, he's not sweating. My father's hair is more gray than black. I squat down on a tombstone next to him. He looks at the dry blood on my legs. There are scars from the mosquito bites. He takes a wet towel from his pocket and cleans off the blood. I forgot to tell you to wear long pants, he says. They're just cuts. They'll heal. I look at the last name and see the word D-U-O-N-G. And I want to make a joke how I could have been David Dung. I imagine invisible people watching us, sitting on their names and birthdays. My grandfather is here, standing behind my father and smiling because his son has finally come home. My father said once, I hope you have a boy just like you so you understand. My father's sense was failure in his voice. I don't think good or bad applies to boys. I think it only matters when we become men. Are we good men? I want to say, but I don't. My father bends on both knees, brushes the dirt away, and kisses the headstone.